The steering wheel spun uselessly in Thaddeus Blackwood's hands as his Mercedes careened toward the guardrail at 80 miles per hour. Through the rain-lashed windshield, he caught a glimpse of jagged rocks and churning river water far below, and knew with crystal clarity that his cousin Vincent had finally made his move. Should have seen this coming. 6 hours earlier, Thaddeus had been sitting in his corner office on the 32nd floor of Blackwood Industries, staring at financial records that made his wolf snarl with rage. Vincent's gambling debt stretched back 3 years, funded by systematic theft from their family company. But the bank transfers to known hunter organizations? That was a death sentence in their world. You always were too trusting, cousin. Vincent's voice had been casual when Thaddeus confronted him, leaning against the office doorframe like they were discussing weekend plans instead of betrayal that could destroy their entire pack. Father always said you'd make a terrible alpha because you think with your heart instead of your instincts. Margaret's been feeding you that poison for years, Thaddeus had replied, his control hanging by a thread. But selling our territory maps to hunters? That's not just stealing money, Vincent. That's genocide. Vincent had shrugged, examining his manicured nails. The pack deserves better leadership. Uncle Augustus knew it when he named me his successor in the original will. A will he changed when he realized what kind of man you really are. We'll see about that. The memory dissolved as Thaddeus's car punched through the guardrail. For a split second, he was airborne, suspended between life and death while lightning illuminated the mountainside. His wolf howled inside him, fighting to survive even as gravity claimed its prize. The Mercedes hit the rocky slope and rolled, metal screaming against stone. Thaddeus felt his ribs crack, tasted copper in his mouth, and through the chaos caught the scent of something that made his wolf go still with recognition, vanilla and steel, strength wrapped in gentleness. Someone else was on this mountain road tonight. Someone who would change everything. The world went black just as headlights appeared above, cutting through the storm like a beacon of hope Thaddeus didn't deserve but desperately needed. Serafina Castellanos pulled her battered Honda to the shoulder the moment she saw the torn guardrail, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd been driving home from her second job at the diner, exhausted from pulling a double shift but grateful for the extra money that would keep the lights on for another month. Oh God. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands, dialing 911 while already running toward the edge. I need emergency services on Mountain Ridge Road, mile marker 15. Single vehicle accident, car went over the side. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the rain, but Serafina was already scrambling down the rocky slope in her scrubs and sneakers, following the trail of twisted metal. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, Mija, you can't save everyone. Sometimes you have to save yourself first. Well, Mama meant well, but Serafina had never been good at walking away from someone who needed help. She found the Mercedes crumpled against a boulder, driver's side partially submerged in the swollen creek. Through the spider-webbed windshield, she could see a man slumped over the wheel, dark hair matted with what looked like rain and maybe worse. Sir. Can you hear me? Serafina waded into the icy water, her nurse training overriding every instinct that screamed about flash floods and hypothermia. The driver's door was jammed, but the passenger side gave way after several desperate yanks. The man was unconscious but breathing, his pulse strong and steady beneath her fingertips. Strange, given the severity of the crash, she'd expected much worse. In her 3 years as a trauma nurse, Serafina had learned to recognize the difference between patients who would make it and those who wouldn't. This man felt like a survivor. She managed to drag him from the wreckage and up the slope just as the first fire truck arrived, its red lights painting the storm in hellish colors. Only when the paramedics took over did Serafina step back, shivering in her soaked scrubs, and get her first clear look at the man she'd pulled from death's jaws. Even unconscious and battered, he was striking, sharp cheekbones, strong jaw, and an aura of barely leashed power that made something primitive in her take notice. She recognized him from business magazines. Thaddeus Blackwood, the billionaire CEO who'd built his family's company into a tech empire. "Ma'am?" One of the paramedics touched her shoulder. "You did exceptional work here. We need to get him to Memorial Hospital, but you probably saved his life." Serafina nodded, wrapping her arms around herself as they loaded Thaddeus Blackwood into the ambulance. She had no idea that 30 miles away, Vincent Blackwood was receiving a phone call that would ruin all his carefully laid plans. "He's alive," the voice reported. Some woman pulled him out before the car could finish the job. Vincent's grip tightened on his phone. In the background, he could hear the soft clink of poker chips and muffled voices, the private game where he'd planned to establish his alibi for tonight's activities. "Then we make sure there isn't a next time," Vincent said quietly, stepping away from the table. "Find out everything about this woman. I want to know if she's a problem." But Vincent had underestimated two things: the strength of a woman who'd already lost everything that mattered and refused to lose anything else, and the protective instincts of an alpha who'd just found something worth protecting. The game had only just begun. Chapter 2. Serafina Castellanos stood in the hospital corridor at 3:15 in the morning, her scrubs still damp from the mountain creek and her hands finally steady enough to text her babysitter. "Emergency at work. Be home by 6 a.m. Kiss Ophelia for me." She should have gone home hours ago. Her shift had ended at midnight, and Mrs. Delacroix next door was watching Ophelia for free, a kindness Serafina could never fully repay. But something kept pulling her back to room 314, where Thaddeus Blackwood lay sleeping under the watchful eye of machines that beeped reassurance into the quiet darkness. "You should go home." Dr. Patricia Brooks emerged from the room, chart in hand. "He's stable. Better than stable, actually. I've never seen anyone bounce back from trauma this quickly." Serafina nodded but didn't move. "His family?" "Still trying to reach them. Apparently his assistant is out of town, and the emergency contact on file, his cousin, isn't answering his phone." Dr. Brooks studied Serafina's face. "You did good work tonight. That man owes you his life. Anyone would have." "No." Dr. Brooks's voice was firm. "Anyone would have called 911 and waited for help. You risked your own life going down that slope in a storm. There's a difference." Serafina wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle into her bones. She'd been running on adrenaline for hours, but now that Thaddeus was safe, her body was remembering it needed sleep. More than that, it needed to go home to Ophelia, who'd probably had another nightmare about cars and wouldn't settle until Serafina held her. "Serafina?" The voice was rough with sleep but alert. Thaddeus Blackwood was awake, those dark eyes focused on her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You should be resting," she said, moving to his bedside automatically. Nurse mode engaged, checking his pupils, the monitors, anything to avoid the way he was looking at her like she was something precious. "So should you." His gaze took in her rumpled scrubs, the exhaustion she was trying to hide. "It's late. Don't you have somewhere to be?" The question was casual, but Serafina heard the underlying current, a man accustomed to knowing everything about the people in his orbit. It should have annoyed her. Instead, it reminded her painfully of David, who'd asked pointed questions because he genuinely cared about the answers. "My shift ended hours ago," she admitted. "I was just making sure you were okay." "And am I okay?" Serafina studied the monitors, his color, the way he held himself. By all medical logic, Thaddeus Blackwood should be in considerably worse shape. The crash had been severe enough to total his car, yet his injuries were healing at an almost supernatural rate. "You're lucky," she said finally. "Very lucky. I prefer to think of it as having a guardian angel." His voice was warm, tinged with something that might have been flirtation if they'd met under different circumstances. One with very quick reflexes and no sense of self-preservation. Heat crept up Serafina's neck. She'd forgotten how it felt to have a man look at her like that, like she was worth looking at. David had been gone 3 years, and in that time she'd become invisible, just another tired single mother moving through the world trying to keep her head above water. Mr. Blackwood. Thaddeus. He shifted in the hospital bed, and she caught a glimpse of lean muscle beneath the hospital gown. Everything about him screamed power and control, even flat on his back and connected to an 4. And I'd like to know your full name, if you don't mind sharing it with the man whose life you saved. Serafina Castellanos. She smoothed his blanket unnecessarily, needing something to do with her hands. And I think you're giving me too much credit. I don't think I'm giving you nearly enough. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning Serafina wasn't ready to examine. She'd learned to be suspicious of powerful men who noticed her. David had taught her that money and charm could hide a multitude of sins. But there was something in Thaddeus's eyes that reminded her of the man she'd fallen in love with at 19, before life had gotten complicated. Before everything had gone wrong. I should let you rest, Serafina said, stepping back from the bed. Professional distance. Safe distance. The doctor wants to keep you for observation, but you should be able to go home tomorrow if your scans come back clear. Serafina. The way Thaddeus said her name made her pause at the door. Thank you. Not just for tonight, but for staying. I know you didn't have to. She managed a smile. Get some sleep, Thaddeus. Serafina made it all the way to the parking garage before the shaking started. Not from cold this time, but from the memory of standing in another hospital 3 years ago, holding David's personal effects in a plastic bag while a doctor explained that massive internal bleeding from the drunk driving accident had been too extensive to repair. We did everything we could, Mrs. Castellanos. I'm so sorry. Sorry didn't pay the medical bills that had followed. Sorry didn't explain to a 2-year-old why Daddy wasn't coming home. Sorry didn't cover the cost of a funeral or help Serafina figure out how to be both mother and father to a little girl who kept asking when everything would go back to normal. Serafina sat in her Honda, hands gripping the steering wheel, and fought the panic attack that always lurked just beneath the surface. She'd worked so hard to build a stable life for Ophelia, to prove she could handle everything on her own. The last thing she needed was to get tangled up with a man like Thaddeus Blackwood, wealthy, powerful, and probably used to getting whatever he wanted. Men like that didn't stick around when life got messy. Serafina had learned that lesson the hard way. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Delacroix, Ophelia sleeping peacefully. Take your time, Mija. Serafina started the car and drove home through empty streets, trying not to think about the way Thaddeus had looked at her or the flutter in her chest when he'd said her name. She had more important things to worry about, like the stack of bills on her kitchen table and Ophelia's upcoming school expenses and whether she could pick up extra shifts next month to cover the car payment. She didn't have time for attraction or the way her pulse had jumped every time Thaddeus focused those dark eyes on her. But as Serafina pulled into her driveway and saw the warm light Mrs. Delacroix had left burning in the front window, she couldn't quite shake the memory of a man who'd looked at her like she mattered. Like she was more than just another overworked single mother barely keeping her head above water. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at her that way. Too long. Inside her small but neat house, Serafina paid Mrs. Delacroix and checked on Ophelia, who was sleeping peacefully in her bed cluttered with stuffed animals and picture books. Her daughter's dark hair fanned across the pillow, and even in sleep, she clutched the worn teddy bear that had been David's last gift to her. Serafina smoothed Ophelia's hair and whispered, "Sweet dreams, baby girl." In the kitchen, she made herself a cup of tea and sat at the table where the monthly bills were spread out like an accusation. Medical debt from David's accident and subsequent treatment. Rent. Utilities. Daycare for Ophelia during Serafina's day shifts. Groceries stretched to last 2 weeks instead of 1. She'd been managing, barely, but managing nonetheless. Working nights at the hospital and picking up shifts at the diner when she could find childcare. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work that let her keep Ophelia and pay their debts without accepting charity from family who'd made their disapproval of her marriage clear from the beginning. "You're too young to tie yourself down to a man with no prospects," her mother had said when Serafina announced her engagement to David at 19. "What happens when you get tired of struggling?" Serafina had been so sure love would be enough. David had been studying to be a teacher, full of dreams about making a difference in kids' lives. They'd planned a simple wedding, a small apartment, children when they could afford them. Everything had seemed possible when they were young and foolish enough to believe good intentions guaranteed good outcomes. Then Ophelia had come along, unplanned but desperately wanted, and David had taken a second job to cover the increased expenses. 2 jobs became 3 when Serafina had complications after delivery that kept her out of work for months. David had been driving home from his night job at the warehouse when the drunk driver ran the red light. The irony wasn't lost on Serafina that she'd spent tonight pulling another man from a car wreck. The universe apparently had a twisted sense of humor. She was still sitting at the kitchen table when Ophelia padded out of her bedroom, teddy bear in tow and dark hair sticking up at impossible angles. "Mama? You're home." "I'm home, sweetheart." Serafina opened her arms, and Ophelia climbed into her lap, still warm and soft from sleep. "Did you have good dreams?" "Uh-huh. I dreamed about a big dog who was really nice and wanted to be my friend." Ophelia settled against Serafina's chest with the boneless trust only children possessed. "Can we get a dog, Mama? Mrs. Delacroix says dogs are good for protection." Serafina smiled into her daughter's hair. "Dogs are expensive, baby. They need food and toys and visits to the doctor, just like people. But this dog was special. He had really pretty eyes, like the man in my drawing." "What man in your drawing?" Ophelia wiggled out of Serafina's lap and ran to the refrigerator, where her latest artwork was displayed with magnets shaped like cartoon characters. "This one. I drew him yesterday but I don't know why. He just kept coming into my head." Serafina's breath caught. The drawing was typical 5-year-old art, stick figures and bright colors, but the man Ophelia had drawn had distinctive features. Dark hair. Strong jawline. And eyes that seemed somehow familiar, even rendered in purple crayon. That's very good, sweetheart. Very detailed." "He looked sad," Ophelia said matter-of-factly. "That's why I drew him smiling instead. People should smile more." Serafina stared at the drawing, unease prickling at the base of her skull. It was probably just a coincidence. Children drew random people all the time, combining features they'd seen on television or in picture books. There was no reason to think Ophelia's mysterious man had anything to do with Thaddeus Blackwood. Except the eyes. Even in purple crayon, those eyes looked exactly like the ones that had watched Serafina with such intensity tonight. "Come on, sweetheart." Serafina scooped Ophelia up, needing to move, to do something normal and mundane. "Let's get you back to bed. Tomorrow's a school day." As she tucked Ophelia under her covers and kissed her forehead, Serafina tried to shake the feeling that tonight had changed something fundamental. That pulling Thaddeus Blackwood from that wreckage had set events in motion she wasn't prepared to handle. But Ophelia was already drifting back to sleep, and Serafina had learned to compartmentalize worry into manageable pieces. Tonight's crisis was over. Thaddeus was safe, Ophelia was safe, and tomorrow Serafina would go back to work and pretend she'd never met a man whose dark eyes made her remember what it felt like to want something more than just survival. Some things were too dangerous to want. Especially for a woman who'd already lost everything once and couldn't afford to lose it again. Chapter 3. Serafina was restocking gauze in the supply closet when Dr. Brooks found her 3 days later, holding a delivery notice and wearing the expression of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. "There's a situation at the nurse's station," Dr. Brooks said carefully. "Apparently someone sent you flowers." "Flowers?" Serafina frowned. Nobody sent her flowers. Her birthday wasn't for months, and Ophelia's kindergarten class didn't typically express appreciation through floral arrangements. More like a flower shop exploded in our hallway. Dr. Brooks handed her the delivery slip. The delivery guy says there are more coming. Serafina read the card twice before the words sank in. For my guardian angel. Thank you for giving me a second chance. Thaddeus. Her stomach dropped. Oh no. Oh yes. And they're beautiful, but Serafina, this is a hospital, not a greenhouse. The head of nursing is having conniptions about infection control. Serafina hurried to the nurse's station, where her co-workers had gathered around what could only be described as a botanical explosion. Roses in every color imaginable, lilies that perfumed the entire corridor, orchids that probably cost more than Serafina's monthly rent. The arrangement was stunning, excessive, and completely inappropriate. Serafina. Thaddeus's voice came from behind her, and she turned to find him approaching with a smile that suggested he was quite pleased with himself. He looked remarkably good for someone who'd been in a car accident 3 days ago. The bruises were already fading, and he moved with the fluid grace of someone who'd never been injured at all. Mr. Blackwood. Serafina kept her voice professional, acutely aware of her co-workers watching with undisguised interest. You shouldn't be here. Visiting hours. Don't apply to former patients checking on their medical bills, Thaddeus finished smoothly. He handed her an envelope. I wanted to thank you properly. Serafina looked at the envelope like it might bite her. The flowers are beautiful, but I can't accept them. Hospital policy. Then take them home. To your daughter. Thaddeus's smile softened. Ophelia, right? I remember you mentioned her. The fact that he remembered made something flutter in Serafina's chest, a dangerous something she had no business feeling. Mr. Blackwood. Thaddeus. Please. Thaddeus. His name felt strange on her tongue, too intimate for a hospital corridor with half the nursing staff eavesdropping. This is very generous, but unnecessary. I was just doing my job. Your job is saving lives inside the hospital. Going down a mountain in a storm to pull strangers from car wrecks is above and beyond the call of duty. Thaddeus stepped closer, and Serafina caught his scent, something woodsy and clean that made her think of deep forests and moonlight. Open the envelope. Serafina's hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal. Inside was a check that made her knees go weak. More money than she made in 6 months. Enough to pay off David's medical debt and have money left over for Ophelia's college fund. I can't accept this. She thrust the check back at him, ignoring the way her co-workers' eyebrows shot toward their hairlines. It's too much. It's not nearly enough. Thaddeus didn't take the check. You saved my life, Serafina. That's worth more than money. You don't understand. Serafina's voice rose slightly, then she forced it back down, remembering where they were. I don't need charity. I'm managing fine on my own. Something flickered in Thaddeus's eyes, surprise, maybe, or respect. This isn't charity. It's gratitude. It's the same thing. Serafina folded the check and handed it back firmly. Thank you for the thought, but I can't accept it. Thaddeus studied her face for a long moment, and Serafina had the unsettling feeling he was seeing more than she wanted to reveal. Finally, he took the check back, but his expression suggested the conversation was far from over. The flowers? Serafina glanced at the elaborate display that was drawing increasingly pointed looks from hospital administration. I'll take one arrangement. For Ophelia. The rest need to go. Fair enough. Thaddeus smiled, and Serafina's traitorous heart skipped a beat. Would you have dinner with me? As friends. To discuss how I can properly express my gratitude without offending your principles. I don't think that's a good idea. Why not? Because you're too handsome and too rich and too interested, and I can't afford to make another mistake. Because my daughter draws pictures of men who look like you for reasons I don't understand. Because when you look at me like that, I remember what it felt like to believe in fairy tales. I'm very busy, Serafina said instead. Everyone has to eat. Thaddeus pulled out his phone. What's your number? I'll call you. Mr. Blackwood. I'm very persistent, Serafina. Ask anyone who knows me. I always get what I want eventually. The words should have sounded arrogant, but coming from Thaddeus, they sounded like a promise. Serafina found herself giving him her number before she could think better of it, then spent the rest of her shift wondering what she'd gotten herself into. 2 hours later, Serafina was loading a single, modest bouquet into her car when her phone rang. Her mother's name flashed on the screen, and Serafina considered letting it go to voicemail. Conversations with Carmen Castellanos rarely improved Serafina's day. Hola, Mama. Serafina, Mija, I just heard from Rosa at the hospital. She says some rich man sent you enough flowers to stock a wedding and offered you money? Carmen's voice carried the particular blend of concern and disapproval she'd perfected over the years. Please tell me you're not getting involved with another man who thinks he can buy you. Serafina closed her eyes and counted to 5. It's not like that, Mama. He was grateful, that's all. Men like that are never just grateful, Serafina. They want something in return. Always. You don't even know him. I know his type. Rich, powerful men who think the world belongs to them. They play with women like you until they get bored, then they move on to someone new. Carmen's voice softened slightly. You have Ophelia to think about. You can't afford to make mistakes. Serafina pulled into the driveway of her small house, where Mrs. Delacroix was visible through the front window, helping Ophelia with what looked like homework. Her life was small but safe, predictable in ways that had taken her 3 years to build. I'm not making mistakes, Mama. I'm being careful. Good. Because men like that, they don't understand what it means to struggle. They think money fixes everything, and when it doesn't, they disappear. Carmen paused. Your father was like that. Serafina had heard this story before, how Carmen had fallen for a charming man with expensive suits and bigger promises, only to find herself pregnant and abandoned when reality didn't match his fantasy. It was why Carmen had worked 3 jobs to raise Serafina alone, why she'd been so suspicious of David despite his obvious devotion. I understand, Mama. I'm not doing anything foolish. See that you don't. Ophelia needs stability, not another man who'll break both your hearts. After her mother hung up, Serafina sat in her car for a few minutes, watching Ophelia through the window. Her daughter was animated, gesturing as she explained something to Mrs. Delacroix, her face bright with the kind of joy that came from being 5 years old and believing the world was fundamentally good. Serafina would do anything to protect that joy. Even if it meant turning away from a man whose dark eyes made her think dangerous thoughts about second chances. Thaddeus spent the rest of the week proving that persistence was indeed one of his defining characteristics. He showed up at the diner where Serafina picked up weekend shifts, ordering coffee and eggs while pretending to read the financial section. He appeared at the grocery store where she shopped, claiming he'd never realized how complicated breakfast cereal could be. He even materialized at Ophelia's school pickup line, somehow having discovered Serafina's routine and positioned himself to offer casual conversation while they waited for the children to be dismissed. This is getting ridiculous, Serafina told him after the 4th, coincidental, encounter. They were standing outside Sunshine Elementary, watching kindergartners stream out of the building like colorful ants. Are you following me? I prefer to think of it as strategic positioning. Thaddeus leaned against his Mercedes, a new one, Serafina noted, since the previous model was presumably still wrapped around a mountain boulder. I'm trying to demonstrate my harmless intentions. By stalking me? By proving I'm interested in your life, not just your gratitude. Thaddeus's expression grew serious. I know this seems sudden, Serafina. But I can't stop thinking about that night. About you. Serafina's heart did something complicated in her chest. Thaddeus. Mama. Ophelia came running across the playground, backpack bouncing and hair flying behind her like a dark banner. She launched herself at Serafina with the full-body enthusiasm only children possessed. Mrs. Peterson says we're going to learn about butterflies next week and I get to bring something for show and tell, and Ophelia stopped mid-sentence, noticing Thaddeus for the first time. Serafina watched her daughter's face go through a series of expressions, curiosity, recognition, and something that looked almost like relief. You're the man from my drawing, Ophelia said matter-of-factly. Thaddeus crouched down to Ophelia's eye level, his expression gentle. I don't think we've met. I'm Thaddeus. I'm Ophelia. I drew you before I knew you, but Mama says that's impossible. Ophelia tilted her head, studying Thaddeus with the intense focus children brought to interesting mysteries. Do you like butterflies? I think they're very beautiful. Like your mother. Ophelia giggled, and Serafina felt her carefully constructed defenses wobble. There was something about watching Thaddeus interact with her daughter, the way he gave Ophelia his complete attention, the genuine warmth in his voice, that made Serafina's chest tight with longing. We should go, Serafina said quickly. Ophelia has homework. Actually, Thaddeus straightened, I was hoping you might have dinner with me tonight. Both of you. There's a family restaurant downtown that's supposed to have excellent pizza. Ophelia's eyes went wide. Pizza? Mama, can we? Please? Serafina looked at her daughter's hopeful face, then at Thaddeus, who was watching her with patient intensity. Every instinct screamed that this was a mistake, that getting involved with Thaddeus Blackwood would only lead to heartbreak. But Ophelia was already chattering about toppings, and Thaddeus was smiling at her daughter like she was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. One dinner, Serafina heard herself say. As friends. As friends, Thaddeus agreed, but something in his eyes suggested he had bigger plans than friendship. Mama Rosa's was the kind of restaurant that had checked tablecloths and wine bottles turned into candle holders, where families came for celebrations and first dates happened over shared appetizers. Serafina hadn't been on anything resembling a date since David died, and she felt awkward and overdressed despite wearing just jeans and a sweater. Ophelia, however, was in her element. She chattered non-stop about school, her friends, her elaborate plans for her upcoming 6th birthday, and her theory that dragons were probably just misunderstood dinosaurs. Thaddeus listened to every word with the kind of attention that made Serafina's heart ache. And then Tommy Morrison said girls can't be scientists, but I told him that's stupid because my mama is practically a doctor and she's way smarter than his dad who sells insurance. Ophelia paused to take a breath and a bite of pizza. Right, Mama? You're definitely smarter than Tommy Morrison, Serafina agreed, trying not to notice how Thaddeus's eyes crinkled when he smiled. What do you do for work, Thaddeus? Ophelia asked with the directness only children possessed. I run a company that makes computer programs. It's not as exciting as being a nurse like your mom. Do you have kids? Ophelia, Serafina warned, but Thaddeus shook his head. It's okay. No, I don't have children. I haven't found the right person to have a family with yet. Ophelia considered this seriously. Mama says the right person is worth waiting for, but sometimes they come when you're not looking for them. Your mama sounds very wise. Serafina felt heat rise in her cheeks. Ophelia, eat your dinner before it gets cold. They were halfway through dessert when Serafina noticed the man approaching their table. Tall, well-dressed, with the kind of calculated charm that made her nursing instincts prickle with warning. But it was Thaddeus's reaction that made her blood run cold, the way his entire body went rigid, his pupils dilating until his eyes looked almost black. Thaddeus. What a pleasant surprise. The man's smile was perfect and completely empty. I've been trying to reach you since your accident. You look remarkably well for someone who went over a mountain. Vincent. Thaddeus's voice was carefully controlled, but Serafina could see the tension radiating through his shoulders, could hear something wild and dangerous humming just beneath his words. This is a family restaurant. Not really your scene. I was having dinner with a client. Business never sleeps, you know. Vincent's gaze moved to Serafina and Ophelia with calculating interest. Aren't you going to introduce me to your friends? Serafina instinctively pulled Ophelia closer, every maternal instinct screaming danger. There was something wrong with this picture, the way Vincent looked at them like they were pieces on a chessboard, the way Thaddeus had gone absolutely still in a way that reminded her of predators preparing to strike. We were just leaving, Serafina said firmly, reaching for her purse. Nonsense. The evening is young. Vincent pulled out a chair and sat down uninvited. I'm Vincent Blackwood, Thaddeus's cousin and business partner. And you must be the good Samaritan who saved our boy's life. The temperature at the table seemed to drop 10 degrees. Thaddeus's breathing had changed, becoming deeper and more controlled, and Serafina could swear she heard something that sounded almost like a growl rumbling in his chest. Thaddeus? Serafina's voice was barely a whisper. Are you okay? Thaddeus turned to look at her, and Serafina's breath caught. His eyes had changed, not just the color, though they seemed darker somehow, but the shape. More intense. More inhuman. Ophelia, Serafina said quietly, never taking her eyes off Thaddeus. Go to the bathroom. Right now. But Mama. Now, sweetheart. I'll be right here. Ophelia must have heard something in her mother's voice that brooked no argument, because she slipped out of her chair and headed toward the back of the restaurant. Serafina waited until her daughter was out of sight, then leaned forward. Thaddeus. Look at me. He did, and Serafina saw the exact moment he realized what was happening. Horror flooded his features as he fought for control, his hands gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles went white. I have to go, he said through gritted teeth. Now. How fascinating, Vincent murmured, watching the exchange with obvious satisfaction. I had no idea you'd found someone so observant. Thaddeus shot to his feet with fluid grace that was definitely not entirely human, threw money on the table, and headed for the exit without another word. Serafina stared after him, her mind struggling to process what she'd just witnessed. He's always been high-strung, Vincent said conversationally. Runs in the family. I hope this won't affect your friendship. Thaddeus needs people who understand his unique nature. Serafina looked at Vincent's smug expression and felt something cold settle in her stomach. Whatever game was being played here, she and Ophelia were apparently pieces on the board whether they wanted to be or not. And Thaddeus Blackwood, she was beginning to realize, was much more complicated than a grateful billionaire with persistent tendencies. The question was, how much more complicated could she handle? Chapter 4. Serafina found Thaddeus sitting on the hood of his Mercedes in the restaurant parking lot, his head in his hands and his entire body trembling with barely contained energy. The night air carried the scent of rain and something wilder, pine forests and moonlight and danger that made her pulse quicken with equal parts fear and fascination. Ophelia's in the bathroom, she said quietly, approaching him like she would a spooked animal in the ER. She didn't see anything. Thaddeus looked up, and Serafina's breath caught. His eyes were still that impossible shade of amber gold, pupils dilated in a way that had nothing to do with the restaurant's dim lighting. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than usual, carrying an edge that made something primitive in her respond. You should take her and go home, Serafina. Lock your doors. Don't answer them for anyone. What's wrong with you? She moved closer, her nurse's instincts overriding common sense. Your pupils are dilated, your breathing is elevated, and you're shaking. Are you having some kind of reaction? Did you take medication? Thaddeus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Something like that. Serafina studied his face, the sharp angles that seemed more pronounced now, the way his canine teeth looked slightly longer than they should be. She'd seen enough medical anomalies in her career to recognize when something fell outside normal parameters, but this was different. This felt intentional. Thaddeus. She kept her voice calm, professional. I need you to tell me what's happening. Are you sick? Not sick. He slid off the hood of the car, moving with that same fluid grace she'd noticed before. Different. Serafina's phone buzzed with a text from Ophelia. Mama, there's a long line. Can I wait here for you? I have to get my daughter, Serafina said, typing back quickly. But this conversation isn't over. Yes, it is. Thaddeus pulled out his keys, and Serafina noticed his hands were steadier now, the trembling under control. Vincent was right about one thing. I am dangerous, Serafina. More than you know. Everyone's dangerous under the right circumstances. Serafina reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing his wrist. His skin was fever-hot, pulse racing. But you're not dangerous to Ophelia or me. I can tell the difference. Thaddeus went absolutely still under her touch. How can you be so sure? Because I've seen real monsters, Thaddeus. They wear expensive suits and smile while they destroy lives. They hide behind positions of authority and use their power to hurt people who can't fight back. Seraphina's voice hardened, thinking of the attending physician who'd cornered her in supply closets, the insurance adjusters who'd fought David's every claim, the drunk driver who'd walked away from the accident that killed her husband with nothing more than a suspended license. Whatever you are, you're not that. Something shifted in Thaddeus's expression, surprise giving way to something deeper, more complicated. You don't understand what you're saying. Then explain it to me. Before Thaddeus could answer, Ophelia appeared at Seraphina's side, tugging on her mother's sleeve. Mama, can we go home now? My tummy feels funny. Seraphina looked down at her daughter, noting the slight pallor in Ophelia's cheeks, the way she kept glancing around the parking lot like she sensed something off. Children were often more intuitive than adults about danger, and Ophelia's discomfort made Seraphina's maternal instincts flare. Of course, sweetheart. Seraphina scooped Ophelia up, then looked back at Thaddeus. This isn't finished. It has to be. No, Seraphina said firmly. It doesn't. Seraphina was unlocking her front door when she noticed the black SUV parked across the street. It hadn't been there when they'd left for dinner, and something about its tinted windows and aggressive stance made her hurry Ophelia inside faster than usual. Mama, who's in that car? Ophelia asked, peering through the living room curtains. Probably just someone visiting the neighbors. Seraphina pulled the curtains closed and double-checked the deadbolt. Why don't you get ready for bed? It's past your bedtime. Ophelia padded off to her room, and Seraphina found herself checking the locks on all the windows, drawing curtains, and turning on every light in the house. The rational part of her mind insisted she was overreacting. Vincent Blackwood was just an unpleasant man with boundary issues, and Thaddeus was probably dealing with some kind of medical condition that affected his behavior. But the part of her brain that had kept her alive through 3 years of single motherhood whispered that something was very, very wrong. Her phone rang at 11:30, just as Seraphina was drifting off to sleep. Seraphina? Thaddeus's voice was strained, urgent. Are you home? Are you safe? Seraphina sat up, instantly alert. What's wrong? Vincent's been calling around, asking questions about you. About Ophelia. I think, Thaddeus broke off with a sharp intake of breath. Damn. Thaddeus? What's happening? Someone's at your house. Black SUV, 2 men getting out. Seraphina, listen to me very carefully, do not answer the door. Take Ophelia and go out the back. Can you get to your car? Seraphina was already moving, bare feet silent on the hardwood as she crept to Ophelia's room. Ophelia, wake up, sweetheart. We need to go. Mama? Ophelia's voice was sleepy, confused. It's okay, baby. We're just going for a drive. Seraphina scooped Ophelia up, grabbing shoes and her purse. Like an adventure. The doorbell rang. Seraphina froze, holding Ophelia against her chest while her daughter's arms wrapped around her neck. Through the front window, she could see shadows moving on the porch, definitely 2 men, both large enough to make Seraphina's blood run cold. Seraphina? Thaddeus's voice came through the phone. Are you there? They're at the front door, she whispered. Back door. Now. I'm 5 minutes away. Seraphina crept through the kitchen, unlocking the back door as quietly as possible. The yard was dark, full of shadows that could hide anything. Her car was in the driveway, on the other side of the house, near the men who were now knocking loudly enough to wake the neighbors. Mama, I'm scared, Ophelia whispered against her neck. I know, baby. We're going to be fine. Seraphina stepped onto the back porch, grateful for the hedge that separated her yard from Mrs. Delacroix's. She could climb through it, get to the neighbor's house, call the police. The back gate opened. Serafina spun around to find a third man stepping into her yard, his smile visible even in the darkness. Large, well-dressed, moving with the kind of confidence that suggested he was used to intimidating people. Mrs. Castellanos? I'm sorry to bother you so late. My name is Detective Williams. He showed her a badge that looked official in the dim light. We've had reports of suspicious activity in the neighborhood. Mind if we ask you a few questions? Serafina's nurse training kicked in, the ability to think clearly under pressure, to assess situations quickly and act decisively. The badge looked real, but everything else felt wrong. Real police didn't surround houses with multiple units for routine questioning. They didn't smile like predators. Of course, Serafina said, keeping her voice steady. But my daughter's sleeping. Could you come back in the morning? This will just take a minute. The man stepped closer, and Serafina caught his scent, expensive cologne that couldn't quite mask something else. Something wild and dangerous that reminded her of Thaddeus's reaction at the restaurant. Actually, I think we should do this at the station, Serafina said, backing toward the house. Let me get dressed and arrange childcare. That won't be necessary. The man's smile widened, showing teeth that looked too sharp in the darkness. We just need you to come with us for a few minutes. The little girl can stay here. Someone will watch her. Every maternal instinct Serafina possessed screamed in alarm. Absolutely not. I'm afraid I have to insist. The man reached for Ophelia, and Serafina's world narrowed to a single, crystal-clear thought: no one touches my daughter. She spun away from his grasp, clutching Ophelia tighter. Help. Someone help us. Serafina. Thaddeus's voice came from the front of the house, followed by sounds that definitely weren't human, snarling, growling, and what sounded like furniture being thrown around. The fake detective's head snapped toward the noise, his expression shifting from predatory confidence to something that looked almost like fear. Change of plans, he said into a radio Serafina hadn't noticed before. The Alpha's here. Extract the package and go. Serafina ran. She burst through the back door, Ophelia clinging to her neck, and raced toward the front of the house where crashes and inhuman sounds suggested Thaddeus was fighting for his life. She rounded the corner to find her living room destroyed, overturned furniture, broken glass, and two unconscious men sprawled on her carpet. Thaddeus stood in the center of the chaos, breathing hard and bleeding from a cut on his forehead. When he turned to look at Serafina, his eyes were that impossible gold again, and she could see canine teeth that were definitely longer than they should be. Are you hurt? He asked, his voice rougher than usual. We're fine. Serafina set Ophelia down but kept one hand on her daughter's shoulder. Thaddeus, what? Behind you. Serafina spun to find the fake detective lunging through the back door, something that looked like a tranquilizer gun in his hand. Before she could react, Thaddeus was moving, faster than any human should be able to move, crossing the room in a blur of motion that ended with the man pinned against the wall by Thaddeus's hand around his throat. Who sent you? Thaddeus's voice was barely recognizable, carrying harmonics that made Serafina's spine tingle. You know who, the man gasped. He wants the woman to back off. This is just a warning. Tell Vincent, Thaddeus said, his grip tightening, that if he comes near Serafina or Ophelia again, I'll forget we're family. The man nodded frantically, and Thaddeus released him. He scrambled for the door, pausing only to grab his unconscious companions and drag them outside. Within minutes, the SUV was gone, leaving Serafina standing in her destroyed living room with her 5-year-old daughter and a man who was clearly not entirely human. Ophelia looked around at the damage, then up at Thaddeus with the matter-of-fact acceptance only children possessed. Are you a superhero? She asked. Thaddeus crouched down to Ophelia's level, his features already returning to normal. Something like that. Cool. Ophelia yawned. Can I go back to bed now? Tomorrow's library day at school. Serafina stared at her daughter, then at Thaddeus, then at her destroyed furniture. Ophelia, go pack a bag. We're staying somewhere else tonight. Where? Serafina looked at Thaddeus, who was watching her with an expression that suggested he was waiting for her to run screaming into the night. With Thaddeus, she heard herself say. Until we figure out what's going on. Thaddeus's eyes widened. Serafina, you don't understand what you're getting into. Then tell me. Serafina straightened, finding her courage in the familiar weight of Ophelia's hand in hers. All of it. Because whatever you are, Vincent's worse. And I'm not running from men like that anymore. Thaddeus studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. It's a long story. I'm a good listener. Serafina squeezed Ophelia's hand. Go pack, sweetheart. Take Mr. Bear and your favorite books. After Ophelia disappeared into her bedroom, Serafina turned back to Thaddeus. Start talking. Thaddeus took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of secrets that had been kept too long. I'm a werewolf, Serafina. Alpha of the Blackwood Pack. And Vincent wants me dead so he can take over everything I've built. Serafina looked at the destroyed furniture, thought about the fake detective's predatory smile, remembered the way Thaddeus had moved like liquid lightning to protect them. Okay, she said simply. Thaddeus blinked. Okay? I told you, I've seen real monsters. At least you're honest about what you are. Serafina started picking up pieces of her broken coffee table. But if we're doing this, I need to know everything. Because Ophelia's safety isn't negotiable. Serafina. Thaddeus's voice was soft, wondering. Most people would run. Most people haven't spent 3 years learning that the only person you can count on is yourself. Serafina straightened, meeting his gaze directly. But maybe it's time I learned to trust someone else. Thaddeus crossed the room in 3 quick strides, cupping her face in his hands. Are you sure? Serafina looked into his golden eyes and felt something that had been frozen inside her for 3 years finally begin to thaw. Ask me again tomorrow. Thaddeus kissed her then, gentle and desperate and full of promises Serafina wasn't sure either of them could keep. But for the first time since David died, she felt like she wasn't facing the world alone. Even if the world had just gotten a lot more complicated. Chapter 5. Serafina woke before dawn in Thaddeus's guest bedroom to find Ophelia curled against her side, small fingers twisted in the fabric of Serafina's sleep shirt. For a moment, in the gray light filtering through unfamiliar curtains, Serafina could pretend this was just another morning, that she hadn't watched a man move faster than physics should allow, that her living room wasn't destroyed, that her 5-year-old daughter hadn't asked a werewolf if he was a superhero. Then she heard voices downstairs. Deep, rough voices carrying an undertone of barely controlled violence that made her maternal instincts flare. Serafina eased out of bed, careful not to wake Ophelia, and crept to the top of the stairs. Thaddeus's house was beautiful, all exposed beams and stone fireplaces, the kind of rustic luxury that probably cost more than Serafina made in 5 years. But the men gathered in his living room looked like they belonged in a different kind of establishment entirely. Should have killed Vincent years ago, one was saying, his voice carrying a slight accent Serafina couldn't place. Augustus was a fool to let sentiment cloud his judgment. Augustus chose Thaddeus for good reasons, another voice argued. Vincent's always been unstable. Weak. Weak or not, he's made his move, a third man interjected. And now he's involving humans. That changes everything. Serafina pressed closer to the banister, trying to get a better view. She counted at least 6 men, all of them large and radiating the same controlled danger she'd sensed in Thaddeus. Pack members, she realized. And they were discussing Vincent like he was a problem to be eliminated rather than a family member to be reasoned with. Where's Thaddeus? The first man asked. We need to decide how to handle this before Vincent makes another move. He's upstairs with the human woman and her cub, someone replied, and Serafina bristled at the dismissive tone. Playing house instead of dealing with pack business. The woman saved his life, another voice said, calmer than the others. That means something. It means she's a complication we don't need. Vincent targeted her to get to Thaddeus. As long as she's around, she's a liability. Serafina's blood ran cold. These men were talking about her and Ophelia like chess pieces, problems to be managed rather than people to be protected. She started to back away from the stairs, but a floorboard creaked under her foot. The voices stopped. Serafina. Thaddeus appeared at the bottom of the stairs, his expression apologetic. I'm sorry. Did we wake you? I was already awake. Serafina came down the stairs, acutely aware of 6 pairs of eyes tracking her movement. She was still wearing the clothes she'd thrown on during their hasty escape, jeans and an old sweater that had seen better days. Not exactly the outfit she'd choose for meeting a werewolf pack, but apparently life wasn't giving her time to plan her wardrobe anymore. Serafina, these are some of my pack members, Thaddeus said carefully. This is Serafina Castellanos, the woman who saved my life. The men studied her with expressions ranging from curious to openly skeptical. Serafina straightened her shoulders and met their gazes directly. She'd faced down hostile doctors, grieving families, and drunk drivers in court. She could handle a few overgrown alpha males. Ms. Castellanos, the oldest of the group said, inclining his head slightly. He had silver hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. I'm Thomas. Thaddeus's beta. Serafina nodded. It's nice to meet you. We were just discussing the Vincent situation, Thomas continued. Thaddeus tells us you and your daughter were threatened last night. Threatened is putting it mildly, Serafina replied. 3 men broke into my house. If Thaddeus hadn't shown up when he did. She let the sentence hang, not wanting to voice what might have happened. Which is exactly why we need to end this now, one of the younger men said, stepping forward. He had dark hair and the kind of restless energy that suggested violence was always just beneath the surface. Vincent's crossed every line. It's time to invoke pack law. Pack law? Serafina looked at Thaddeus for explanation. Traditional justice, Thaddeus said quietly. An eye for an eye. You mean killing him? The silence that followed Serafina's blunt statement stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, Thomas spoke. Vincent has betrayed his alpha, endangered pack members, and now threatened humans under Thaddeus's protection. By our laws, yes, that warrants death. Serafina felt something cold settle in her stomach. And my daughter? What happens to Ophelia when Vincent's dangerous associates decide to come after the woman whose boyfriend killed their business partner? The men exchanged glances, and Serafina realized they hadn't considered the long-term consequences of their traditional justice. They were thinking like predators. Eliminate the immediate threat, not like people who understood how human criminal networks operated. Vincent's gambling debts aren't just to other werewolves, Serafina continued, gaining confidence. He owes money to humans. Dangerous humans who won't care about pack law or supernatural politics. If you kill Vincent, they'll come after Thaddeus. After me. After Ophelia. Then what do you suggest? The young man asked, his tone making it clear he thought Serafina had no business offering opinions. Information. Serafina looked around the room, making eye contact with each man. Before you decide to go to war, shouldn't you understand exactly what you're fighting? Who Vincent owes money to, what they want, how deep this goes. Thaddeus moved to stand beside her, and Serafina felt some of her tension ease. She's right. We've been reacting instead of thinking strategically. Thaddeus, Thomas said carefully, I understand your feelings for this woman, but pack decisions shouldn't be influenced by. By what? Thaddeus's voice carried an edge that made the air in the room feel heavier. By logic? By considering consequences beyond the immediate satisfaction of revenge? By human emotions, Thomas finished quietly. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Serafina realized she was seeing something most humans never witnessed, the collision between ancient instincts and modern reality, between pack loyalty and individual choice. My emotions aren't the problem here, Thaddeus said, his voice deceptively calm. The problem is that we're dealing with a threat that goes beyond traditional pack conflicts. Vincent isn't just challenging my leadership, he's involving outside forces that could expose us all. Serafina's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at the screen and felt her world tilt sideways. The message was from a number she didn't recognize. Your daughter is safe. For now. Come alone to Riverside Park at noon if you want to keep her that way. No police. No werewolves. Thaddeus. Serafina's voice came out as a whisper. He was beside her instantly, reading the message over her shoulder. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as every man present focused on the threat to Ophelia. They have my daughter, Serafina said, her voice stronger now, fueled by maternal rage. Your pack politics just became irrelevant. Thaddeus was already moving, pulling out his phone. I'm calling my contacts at. No. Serafina grabbed his arm. The message said no police, no werewolves. If they hurt Ophelia because you involved your pack. Serafina, you can't seriously be considering going alone. She's my daughter, Thaddeus. I'll do whatever it takes to get her back safely. Which is exactly what they're counting on, Thomas interjected. This is obviously a trap. They take the child to force you into a vulnerable position. Serafina rounded on him, and several of the pack members stepped back instinctively. Apparently, maternal fury was a force even werewolves recognized. Then what's your brilliant alternative? Storm the park with a pack of werewolves and hope Ophelia doesn't get caught in the crossfire? She's 5 years old. Serafina. Thaddeus's voice was gentle but firm. I understand you're scared. But walking into a trap won't save Ophelia. It'll just give them 2 hostages instead of 1. Serafina stared at him, feeling the weight of impossible choices. Trust Thaddeus and his pack to handle this their way, risking Ophelia's life on the competence of people who thought violence was the solution to every problem. Or go alone and hope that maternal desperation would be enough to bring her daughter home safely. Her phone rang. Serafina looked at the unknown number and answered immediately. Hello? Mama? Ophelia's voice was small, frightened, but alive. Serafina's knees nearly buckled with relief. Ophelia, baby, are you okay? Are you hurt? I'm scared, Mama. The lady says I have to stay here until you come get me. She says you're in trouble and need to fix it. What lady, sweetheart? Can you tell me anything about where you are? It's dark and smells funny. Like old leaves. And there's a river, I think. The lady has silver hair like Grandma Carmen, but she's not nice like Grandma. Serafina's mind raced. Riverside Park, old leaves, silver hair. Someone Ophelia had described as a lady, not a man. Can you put the lady on the phone, baby? She says no talking to strangers. But Mama, I'm really scared. When are you coming to get me? Soon, sweetheart. Very soon. I love you. I love you too, Mama. The line went dead. Serafina looked up to find every man in the room watching her with expressions of grim determination. Whatever pack politics had been at play before, Ophelia's kidnapping had unified them around a single purpose. Silver hair, Serafina said to Thaddeus. Ophelia said the woman has silver hair. Thaddeus went very still. Woman? Your daughter said, the lady. Not the man. Thomas stepped forward, his face pale. Thaddeus, you don't think. Think what? Serafina demanded. Who has silver hair and access to Ophelia? Thaddeus closed his eyes, and when he opened them, Serafina saw a pain that went deeper than physical injury. My Aunt Margaret, he said quietly. Vincent's mother. The room erupted in angry voices, but Serafina only heard fragments: betrayal, family honor, decades of resentment. Her focus had narrowed to a single, burning point: getting Ophelia back from people who would use a child as a weapon in their family war. How long? Serafina asked, cutting through the chaos. How long has she been helping Vincent? I don't know, Thaddeus admitted. Maybe years. She's always resented that my father was chosen as alpha instead of her husband. When my father died and I inherited the position instead of Vincent. She decided to take matters into her own hands, Serafina finished. Does she know we're here? At your house? Thaddeus's expression darkened. She's family. She has access to everything, my properties, my security codes, my pack communications. Serafina felt the walls closing in. They were trapped in Thaddeus's house, surrounded by his pack, while Vincent and Margaret held Ophelia hostage and waited for Serafina to walk into their trap. There has to be another way, she said, more to herself than to the room. There is, Thomas said grimly. We end this today. All of it. And risk Ophelia's life? Or we could try negotiating, Thaddeus said slowly. Give them what they want. Serafina looked at him sharply. What do they want? Me to step down as alpha. Vincent takes over the pack, Margaret gets the power she's always craved, and their gambling debts become the pack's problem instead of theirs. You do that? Give up everything for Ophelia? Thaddeus met her eyes, and Serafina saw the answer there before he spoke. Yes. The simple word hit Serafina like a physical blow. This man, this alpha werewolf who commanded the loyalty of dangerous men and controlled a business empire, would sacrifice everything he'd built to save her daughter. No, Serafina said firmly. There has to be another way. Serafina. No, Thaddeus. I won't let you destroy your life to fix mine. Serafina looked around the room at the pack members who were watching this exchange with varying degrees of surprise and respect. How many of you have children? 3 hands went up slowly. Then you understand, Serafina continued. I'll do anything to get Ophelia back safely. But not at the cost of innocent people's lives. Vincent and Margaret aren't going to stop with taking over your pack. They'll destroy everything you've built, hurt people you've sworn to protect. What are you suggesting? Thomas asked. Serafina took a deep breath, her mind racing through possibilities and discarding them as quickly as they formed. Finally, an idea began to take shape, dangerous, complicated, but possible. I suggest we give them exactly what they expect, Serafina said. But not what they want. Thaddeus raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Meaning I go to that park at noon, alone, just like they demanded. But I don't go defenseless, and I don't go without backup they won't see coming. Serafina looked around the room at 6 werewolves who could move faster than human eyes could follow, think strategically under pressure, and protect what mattered to them with lethal efficiency. How good are you at improvisation? Thaddeus smiled for the first time since Ophelia's kidnapping, and Serafina saw something predatory and satisfied in his expression. We're very, very good at improvisation. Chapter 6. Serafina sat in Thaddeus's kitchen at 11:30. Nursing her 3rd cup of coffee and trying not to think about what could go wrong in the next 30 minutes. The plan was solid, or as solid as any plan involving werewolves, kidnapped children, and family betrayal could be. But plans had a way of falling apart when emotions ran high, and Serafina had never felt more emotionally invested in an outcome. The tracking device is working perfectly, Thomas reported, returning from testing the equipment they'd hidden in Serafina's jacket. We'll know exactly where you are at all times. And if something goes wrong? Serafina asked. Then we improvise, Thaddeus said grimly. He'd been pacing the kitchen for the past hour, his controlled energy filling the space like barely contained lightning. But nothing's going to go wrong. Serafina wished she shared his confidence. She'd spent enough time in emergency rooms to know that confidence was often the last thing people felt before everything went sideways. Her phone rang. Margaret's number. It's time, Serafina said, answering the call. Serafina, dear. Margaret's voice was warm, grandmotherly, completely at odds with the fact that she was holding Ophelia hostage. I hope you're ready for our little meeting. Where's my daughter? Safe and sound, I promise. She's such a sweet child, reminds me of Vincent when he was that age. So trusting, so eager to please. Margaret's tone carried a subtle threat that made Serafina's jaw clench. I do hope we can resolve this situation without any unpleasantness. What do you want? Oh, my dear, it's not about what I want. It's about what's best for everyone involved. You see, Thaddeus has been alpha for 5 years now, and frankly, the pack hasn't thrived under his modern leadership style. Vincent would be so much better suited to the role. Serafina looked at Thaddeus, who was listening to every word with an expression of barely controlled fury. She could see the pain beneath the anger, the betrayal of someone he'd trusted cutting deeper than any physical wound. And if Thaddeus steps down? Then Ophelia comes home to her mama, you both get a generous settlement to relocate somewhere far from pack politics, and everyone lives happily ever after. Margaret's voice hardened slightly. But if Thaddeus insists on being stubborn about this, well, children are so fragile, aren't they? Serafina's grip tightened on the phone. If you hurt her. I won't have to, dear. Not if you're reasonable. Now, are you coming to the park or shall I tell Vincent to proceed with alternative arrangements? I'm on my way. Excellent. And Serafina? Come alone. My son gets nervous around werewolves who aren't family. The line went dead. Thaddeus was beside her instantly, his hands cupping her face. Hey. Look at me. Serafina met his golden eyes and felt some of her panic recede. I'm scared, Thaddeus. I know. But we're going to get her back. I promise. Don't make promises you can't keep. Thaddeus kissed her forehead, gentle and fierce. I've never broken a promise to someone I love. The words hung between them, heavy with implication and terrible timing. Serafina felt her heart do something complicated in her chest, but there wasn't time to examine what Thaddeus had just said or what it meant for her carefully reconstructed life. I have to go, she whispered. We all have to go, Thomas corrected. Remember, you're not doing this alone. Serafina nodded, pulling on her jacket and checking that her phone was charged. The plan was for her to go to the park, engage Margaret and Vincent in conversation while Thaddeus and his pack moved into position around the perimeter. When they had visual confirmation of Ophelia's location, Thaddeus would signal Serafina to get clear while the pack handled the extraction. It was a good plan. It accounted for most variables. It didn't account for Margaret being 3 steps ahead of them. Riverside Park was exactly as Serafina remembered from Ophelia's school field trips, winding paths through old-growth trees, a playground near the main entrance, and plenty of secluded spots where someone could hide a frightened child. Serafina walked the main path slowly, hyper-aware of every shadow and rustling leaf, wondering if Thaddeus was already in position or if she was truly walking into this alone. She found Margaret sitting on a bench near the old stone bridge, looking like any grandmother enjoying a peaceful afternoon. Silver hair perfectly styled, expensive wool coat, leather gloves that probably cost more than Serafina's monthly grocery budget. The only thing that marked her as dangerous was the cold calculation in her pale blue eyes. Serafina, dear. Thank you for coming. Margaret gestured to the bench beside her. Please, sit. We have so much to discuss. Serafina remained standing. Where's Ophelia? Nearby. Safe and comfortable, I assure you. Margaret smiled, and Serafina could see where Vincent had inherited his empty charm. She's quite taken with the young man watching her. He's been telling her stories about wolves and magic. Children love fairy tales, don't they? Serafina's blood ran cold. What young man? Oh, just one of our pack members who believes Vincent should be alpha. Loyalty is such a precious commodity these days. Margaret's smile widened. Poor Thaddeus has never understood that leadership isn't about being the strongest or the smartest. It's about inspiring devotion in the right people. You mean bribing them? I prefer to think of it as recognizing talent and compensating it appropriately. Margaret crossed her legs elegantly. For instance, did you know that pack members only earn a living wage if they're in Thaddeus's inner circle? Everyone else struggles to make ends meet while he builds his corporate empire. Serafina felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. How many pack members are working for you? Enough. Margaret's voice carried quiet satisfaction. More than Thaddeus realizes, certainly. You see, dear, I've been planning this transition for years. Every slight Vincent endured, every time Thaddeus chose someone else for important pack business, every moment my son was made to feel like a second-class member of his own family, I remembered it all. Serafina looked around the park, suddenly understanding that the plan she and Thaddeus had made was built on a foundation of assumptions that were completely wrong. Margaret wasn't just Vincent's enabler, she was the architect of a coup that had been in motion for years. Thaddeus thinks he's surrounding this park with loyal pack members, Serafina said quietly. Oh, he is. The question is, loyal to whom? Margaret checked her watch, a delicate gold piece that caught the autumn sunlight. They should be moving into position right about now. Serafina's phone buzzed with a text from Thaddeus, in position. No visual on Ophelia yet. Keep her talking. Serafina's hands shook as she typed back, it's a trap. Margaret has pack members working for her. Get out. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Margaret said pleasantly, noting Serafina's phone activity. Vincent is watching from the tree line with a very powerful rifle. If he sees Thaddeus or his remaining loyal followers retreat, he's been instructed to take action. Serafina forced herself to put the phone away. What do you want? I want what's best for my family and my pack. Thaddeus has been alpha for 5 years, and what does he have to show for it? A corporate empire that benefits him while pack members struggle. A modern leadership style that ignores centuries of tradition. An attachment to a human woman that makes him vulnerable to exactly the kind of manipulation we're employing today. Margaret stood gracefully, brushing imaginary lint from her coat. Vincent, on the other hand, understands pack hierarchy. He knows that strength comes from unity, from shared sacrifice, from putting the pack's needs above individual desires. Vincent is a gambling addict who's stolen from his own family and sold pack territory to hunters, Serafina said flatly. Vincent made some poor choices when he was struggling with the pain of being overlooked and undervalued, Margaret corrected. But addiction is a disease, dear. With proper support and the responsibilities of leadership, he'll overcome those challenges. Serafina stared at Margaret's serene expression and realized she was looking at someone who'd spent years justifying increasingly dangerous behavior because admitting the truth would shatter her carefully constructed reality. You really believe that, don't you? That Vincent will be a better alpha than Thaddeus. I know it. Margaret's voice carried absolute conviction. Vincent has vision, Serafina. He understands that the pack needs to expand, to take territory from weaker groups, to build real power instead of hiding behind human corporations and modern conveniences. And the hunters? Vincent's contacts who want to kill every supernatural creature they can find? Margaret waved a dismissive hand. Temporary allies. Once Vincent is alpha and the pack is strong enough, we'll deal with the hunter problem permanently. Serafina felt cold understanding settle in her stomach. Margaret wasn't just enabling Vincent's worst impulses, she was actively encouraging them. The woman sitting beside her was talking about war, about conquest, about turning Thaddeus's carefully balanced pack into something that would draw every hunter in the country down on their heads. You're going to get them all killed, Serafina said quietly. I'm going to make them strong. Margaret's mask of grandmotherly warmth finally slipped, revealing something cold and hungry underneath. Thaddeus has made them weak with his human sensibilities and corporate politics. Vincent will remind them what it means to be wolves. Serafina's phone buzzed again. This time the text was from an unknown number. Mama, the man says I have to be brave like you. He says you're coming to get me soon. Serafina's heart stopped. Ophelia had somehow gotten access to a phone, which meant either her guard was incompetent or something had gone very wrong with Margaret's careful planning. Problems? Margaret asked, noting Serafina's expression. Ophelia texted me. Margaret's composure cracked slightly. That's impossible. She's under constant supervision. Serafina showed her the message, watching Margaret's face go through a series of micro-expressions, surprise, concern, and finally calculation. It seems we have a complication, Margaret said carefully. I should call Vincent. As Margaret reached for her phone, Serafina made a decision that had nothing to do with plans or strategy and everything to do with a mother's desperation. Wait. Serafina grabbed Margaret's wrist. Before you call him, I need to know something. Are you absolutely certain Vincent can handle being alpha? Because if you're wrong, if he fails, every person in that pack will pay the price for your ambition. Margaret looked down at Serafina's hand on her wrist, then back up at her face. My dear girl, you're hardly in a position to negotiate. I'm not negotiating. I'm offering you a choice. Serafina released Margaret's wrist but held her gaze. Help me get Ophelia back safely, and I'll convince Thaddeus to step down voluntarily. No violence, no pack war, no risk to the people you claim to care about. And if I refuse? Serafina thought about Thaddeus's golden eyes, about Thomas's quiet loyalty, about the pack members who'd been willing to risk everything to save her daughter. About Ophelia, somewhere in this park with people who saw her as nothing more than leverage in their family power struggle. Then I stopped trying to protect Vincent from the consequences of his choices, Serafina said quietly. Thaddeus wanted to handle this the old way, pack law, violent justice. I convinced him to try negotiation first. But if something happens to Ophelia because of your games, I'll make sure he knows that mercy was a mistake. Margaret studied Serafina's face for a long moment, and Serafina saw the exact instant when the older woman realized she was looking at someone who had nothing left to lose. You love him, Margaret said with something like surprise. You actually love Thaddeus. More than I thought possible, Serafina admitted. But I love my daughter more. Margaret was quiet for several heartbeats, her pale eyes distant. When she spoke again, her voice carried a note Serafina hadn't heard before, uncertainty. Vincent is at my house with Ophelia. The pack members I recruited are supposed to be moving against Thaddeus's people right now. Margaret looked at her phone, then at Serafina. If I call this off, if I tell them to stand down, Vincent will never forgive me. And if you don't, Thaddeus will never forgive you. And neither will the pack members who trusted you. Serafina leaned forward. Margaret, you're not just choosing between Thaddeus and Vincent. You're choosing what kind of pack you want to be part of. One built on trust and mutual respect, or one built on fear and manipulation. Margaret's phone rang. Vincent's name flashed on the screen. Serafina held her breath, watching Margaret stare at the incoming call. Everything, Ophelia's safety, Thaddeus's life, the future of the pack, balanced on whatever decision Margaret made in the next few seconds. Margaret answered the phone. Vincent, darling, she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil Serafina could see in her eyes. We need to talk. Chapter 7. The Blackwood family estate sprawled across 20 acres of pristine woodland, its stone mansion rising from the landscape like something out of a Gothic novel. Serafina had never seen anything like it, towering windows that caught the late afternoon sun, carved stone gargoyles perched on corners, and gardens that probably required a full-time staff to maintain. It was the kind of old money elegance that whispered of power passed down through generations. It was also where Margaret was holding Ophelia hostage. The monthly pack gathering, Thaddeus explained as they approached the estate in his Mercedes, Thomas and 4 other pack members following in a second vehicle. Every Blackwood Alpha has hosted it for over a century. It's sacred ground, neutral territory where pack disputes are supposed to be resolved peacefully. Serafina watched the mansion grow larger through the windshield, her stomach churning with anxiety. And Margaret thinks this is the perfect place for a leadership challenge? Margaret knows exactly what she's doing, Thaddeus said grimly. If she forces a challenge during the gathering, with the entire pack present, tradition demands that I either fight Vincent or forfeit my position. There's no middle ground. And Ophelia? Thaddeus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Pack law protects children during gatherings. But Margaret's already shown she's willing to break tradition when it suits her purposes. Serafina's phone had been silent since Margaret's cryptic conversation with Vincent at the park 2 hours ago. They'd followed Margaret's car here, keeping their distance, while Serafina wrestled with growing dread about what they might find at the estate. How many pack members will be there? Serafina asked. All of them. Maybe 60 adults, plus their children. Thaddeus parked in the circular drive, where a dozen other cars already waited. Serafina, I need you to understand something. Once we go inside, pack politics take over. I might not be able to protect you the way I want to. I'm not asking you to protect me, Serafina said quietly. I'm asking you to help me protect Ophelia. Thaddeus turned to look at her, and Serafina saw something in his golden eyes that made her chest tight. After tonight, if we get through this, I want to talk about us. About what this means. Thaddeus. I know the timing is terrible. I know we've only known each other a week. But Serafina, I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. Thaddeus reached for her hand, his fingers warm and steady. When this is over, I want to know if you feel the same way. Serafina squeezed his fingers, thinking about the life she'd built for herself and Ophelia, small, safe, predictable. Then she thought about the way Thaddeus looked at her like she was something precious, the way he'd been willing to sacrifice everything for Ophelia's safety, the way her carefully constructed walls had crumbled in less than a week. Ask me again when my daughter is safe, she said. Thaddeus brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Deal. Thomas appeared at Serafina's window, his expression grim. Thaddeus, we need to move. Margaret's already inside, and word is spreading about the challenge. Serafina took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. The late afternoon air carried the scent of pine and something wilder, the accumulated presence of dozens of werewolves in one location. Her human senses couldn't identify it, but something primitive in her recognized the danger. The estate's front doors were massive oak affairs that probably weighed more than Serafina's car. They opened before Thaddeus could knock, revealing a young woman with dark hair and cautious eyes. Alpha, she said, inclining her head respectfully. Margaret is waiting in the great hall. The challenge has been formally issued. Thaddeus nodded grimly. Thank you, Evangeline. How long ago? 20 minutes. Vincent. Evangeline hesitated, glancing at Serafina. Vincent seems different, Alpha. Something's wrong with him. Serafina's blood chilled. Wrong how? Evangeline looked to Thaddeus for permission before answering. Agitated. Talking too fast, pupils dilated. Margaret keeps trying to calm him down, but he's not listening to her anymore. Serafina and Thaddeus exchanged glances. Whatever Margaret had set in motion, it sounded like Vincent was spiraling beyond her control. Where's my daughter? Serafina asked bluntly. Evangeline's eyes widened slightly. Your daughter? I thought, the child Margaret brought is in the library with some of the pack mothers. But they said she was Vincent's. She's mine, Serafina said firmly. And I want to see her. Now. Evangeline looked to Thaddeus, who nodded. Take Serafina to Ophelia. I'll handle Margaret and the challenge. No. Serafina grabbed Thaddeus's arm. We stay together. I'm not letting you walk into that room alone while your aunt holds my daughter hostage. Serafina, this is pack business. If you're there when the challenge officially begins, then I'll be there. Serafina straightened her shoulders, channeling every ounce of strength she developed over 3 years of single motherhood. Ophelia is my child, Thaddeus. That makes this my business too. Thaddeus studied her face for a moment, then smiled, an expression that was equal parts admiration and concern. Stay close to me. Whatever happens in there, don't interfere unless Ophelia is in immediate danger. Serafina nodded, though privately she reserved the right to interfere if anyone threatened her daughter. Pack politics be damned. Evangeline led them through corridors lined with oil paintings of stern-faced Blackwood ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow Serafina's progress. The Great Hall was exactly what its name suggested, a cavernous space with soaring ceilings, stone fireplaces large enough to stand in, and enough seating for the 60-plus pack members who were currently arranged in a rough circle around the room's center. The conversation died the moment Thaddeus entered. Serafina felt dozens of pairs of eyes tracking their movement, assessing, judging. She'd never felt more human or more out of place. Margaret stood near the main fireplace, elegant in a way that reminded Serafina of movie villains, beautiful, composed, and completely ruthless. Vincent was beside her, and Evangeline had been right about something being wrong. He was pacing in tight circles, his movements jerky and unpredictable. And there, sitting on a couch near the back of the room with two women Serafina didn't recognize, was Ophelia. Serafina's daughter looked small and scared but unharmed, clutching the teddy bear she'd brought from home. When Ophelia saw Serafina, her face lit up with relief and joy. "Mama." Ophelia started to get up, but one of the women gently held her back. "Not yet, sweetheart," the woman said kindly. "Let the grown-ups talk first." Serafina forced herself not to run to Ophelia, knowing that any sudden movement might escalate an already volatile situation. Instead, she followed Thaddeus into the center of the circle, where Margaret was waiting with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thaddeus, dear. Thank you for coming." Margaret's voice carried clearly through the hall. "And Serafina, how lovely to see you again. I do hope you're prepared for what comes next." "I'm prepared to take my daughter home," Serafina replied evenly. "Of course you are. But first, we have some family business to attend to." Margaret gestured to Vincent, who had stopped pacing and was now staring at Thaddeus with an expression of barely contained rage. "Vincent has something to say to you, Thaddeus." Vincent stepped forward, and Serafina got her first close look at Thaddeus's cousin. He was handsome in a way that reminded her of magazine models, perfect features arranged with mathematical precision. But his eyes were wild, pupils dilated, and his hands were shaking slightly. "Thaddeus," Vincent said, his voice too loud for the space. "Cousin. Alpha. The man who has everything while the rest of us scramble for scraps." "Vincent," Thaddeus replied carefully. "You look unwell. Maybe we should postpone this until..." "Postpone?" Vincent laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "I've been postponing my whole life, Thaddeus. Postponing challenging you, postponing taking what should be mine, postponing proving that I'm worthy of the Blackwood name." Serafina glanced around the room and saw pack members exchanging worried glances. Whatever they'd expected from this challenge, Vincent's current state wasn't it. "I formally challenge Thaddeus Blackwood for leadership of this pack," Vincent announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "By right of blood and pack law, I demand trial by combat." A murmur ran through the assembled pack members. Thaddeus stepped forward, his posture relaxed but alert. "Vincent, your family. I don't want to fight you." "But you will," Margaret interjected smoothly. "Because if you don't, you forfeit your position and Vincent becomes alpha by default." "And Ophelia?" Serafina asked, her voice cutting through the political maneuvering. "What happens to my daughter while you two play your games?" Margaret's smile widened. "Ophelia stays here until the challenge is resolved. Insurance, you might say, that everyone behaves appropriately." Serafina felt rage build in her chest, clean, pure, and absolutely fearless. She stepped forward until she was standing between Thaddeus and Margaret, facing the older woman directly. "You're using a 5-year-old child as a hostage to force a fight between family members," Serafina said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "What kind of person does that?" "A practical one," Margaret replied. "Sometimes difficult decisions require difficult methods." "No," Serafina said firmly. "Difficult decisions require courage and integrity. What you're doing is cowardice. You're so afraid that Vincent can't win on his own merits that you're willing to endanger an innocent child to stack the deck in his favor." Serafina turned to address the room, looking at faces that ranged from curious to hostile to sympathetic. "I'm not a werewolf," Serafina continued. "I don't understand your traditions or your politics. But I understand what it means to protect children. And I understand the difference between strength and cruelty." She gestured toward Vincent, who was wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool temperature in the hall. "Look at him. Really look. Does this man seem stable enough to lead anyone? He's shaking, sweating, pupils dilated, classic signs of substance abuse or withdrawal. Margaret, is this really the person you want making life and death decisions for 60 families? Margaret's composure cracked slightly. Vincent is going through a difficult period. Leadership will give him purpose, help him overcome. Leadership doesn't cure addiction, Serafina interrupted. It just gives addicts more ways to hurt people while they're destroying themselves. Vincent's head snapped up, his eyes focusing on Serafina with sudden clarity. You don't know anything about me. I know you're in pain, Serafina said gently. I can see it. And I know that pain is driving you to make choices that are hurting people you claim to care about. Vincent, Thaddeus said quietly. It's not too late to call this off. We can get you help. Help? Vincent's laugh was bitter. You mean like the help I got when Father chose you over me? Like the help I got when Uncle Augustus made it clear I'd never be good enough? Like the help I got when every decision I made was compared to your perfect track record? Vincent's composure finally cracked completely, years of resentment pouring out in a torrent of words. Do you know what it's like, Thaddeus? Growing up in your shadow? Watching everyone fawn over the golden child while treating me like a consolation prize? I've been medicating myself just to get through family dinners where everyone talks about your latest success while I sit there feeling like a failure. Serafina felt something shift in the room, surprise, understanding, sympathy. The pack members were seeing Vincent not as a challenger but as a broken man lashing out from pain. The gambling, the drinking, the stupid deals with hunters. I did it all because I figured if I couldn't be the best Blackwood, I might as well be the worst. At least then I'd be notable for something. Vincent sank into a chair, his hands covering his face. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I just wanted to matter. I wanted to feel like I belonged in this family instead of being the mistake everyone was too polite to mention. Margaret moved toward her son, her face pale. Vincent, darling, you don't mean. I mean all of it, Mother. Vincent looked up at Margaret, and Serafina saw decades of pain in his expression. You've spent my entire life telling me I deserved better, that I was being cheated, that I should fight for what was mine. But what if what's mine is just being the family disappointment? What if that's all I'm capable of? The great hall was absolutely silent. Serafina looked around and saw pack members processing Vincent's revelation, the understanding that this challenge wasn't about leadership but about a man's desperate attempt to find worth in destruction. Thaddeus stepped forward slowly, his expression gentle. Vincent, you're not a disappointment. You're family. And family means we help each other, not tear each other apart. It's too late for that, Vincent said quietly. I've burned too many bridges, made too many enemies. Even if I wanted to change, the hunters I dealt with won't just let me walk away. Serafina felt pieces clicking together in her mind. That's why you needed to be alpha. Not just for pride, but for protection. You thought if you controlled the pack, you could handle the hunter problem. Vincent nodded miserably. They want werewolf territory in exchange for forgiving my debts. If I'm just Vincent Blackwood, pack failure, I'm expendable. But if I'm alpha, then you've put everyone in this room at risk, Thaddeus said, but his voice carried sadness rather than anger. Vincent, we could have worked together to solve this. You didn't have to carry it alone. Margaret stepped forward, her face a mask of conflicted emotions. I was trying to help him. I thought if he had power, respect, he could overcome his problems. You thought wrong, Serafina said bluntly. What Vincent needed was therapy, support, and someone to tell him he was worth saving as he is. Instead, you fed his delusions and enabled his worst impulses. Serafina turned to address the pack again. I'm taking my daughter home now. Whatever you decide about leadership, do it because it's best for your families, not because you're being manipulated by blackmail and hostage-taking. She started toward Ophelia, but Vincent's voice stopped her. Serafina, wait. Vincent stood up slowly, his movements more controlled now. I'm sorry. About Ophelia, about threatening you, about all of it. I never wanted to hurt children. Serafina studied his face and saw genuine remorse there. Then help me end this. Call off whatever deals you made with the hunters. Get the help you need. Stop letting your pain turn you into someone you don't want to be. Vincent looked around the room at pack members who were watching him with expressions ranging from sympathy to disappointment. Finally, his gaze settled on Thaddeus. I withdraw my challenge, Vincent said quietly. Thaddeus is the rightful alpha. I'm not fit to lead anyone right now. The tension in the room seemed to deflate all at once. Serafina hurried to Ophelia, scooping her daughter up and holding her tight. Mama, Ophelia whispered against her neck. I was scared, but the nice ladies told me stories and said you were coming. I'm here, baby. We're going home. Serafina looked back at Thaddeus, who was watching her with an expression that made her heart race. Around them, pack members were beginning to talk in small groups, the formal challenge dissolving into family conversations about healing and moving forward. Margaret stood alone near the fireplace, looking older than her years and finally understanding the cost of her ambitions. Margaret, Thaddeus said gently. Vincent needs professional help. Real help, not pack politics. Can you support him in that? Margaret nodded slowly, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. I thought I was protecting him. I thought if I could give him what he wanted. Sometimes what people want isn't what they need, Serafina said, adjusting Ophelia's weight in her arms. But it's not too late to start over. As they walked out of the great hall, Ophelia still clinging to Serafina's neck, Thaddeus fell into step beside them. So, he said quietly. Ready for that conversation now? Serafina looked at him, this man who'd risked everything for her daughter, who'd shown mercy to family members who'd betrayed him, who'd somehow become essential to her carefully rebuilt life in the span of a week. Ask me again tomorrow, she said, but this time she was smiling. Thaddeus smiled back, and Serafina thought that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to believe in second chances after all. Chapter 8. 3 weeks after the confrontation at the Blackwood estate, Serafina found herself standing in her old kitchen, surrounded by boxes and the remnants of a life she was choosing to leave behind. Ophelia sat at the kitchen table, carefully wrapping her favorite coffee mug in newspaper, the one with the cartoon cat that had survived David's death, 3 moves, and countless rushed morning routines. Are you sure about this, Mama? Ophelia asked, her 5-year-old face serious with the weight of adult decisions. Moving to Thaddeus's big house? Serafina paused in her packing, looking around the small kitchen where she'd eaten countless meals alone, paid bills by lamplight after Ophelia was asleep, and slowly rebuilt her life one careful piece at a time. This house represented safety, independence, the proof that she could survive anything. But it also represented isolation, struggle, and the exhaustion of carrying everything alone. I'm sure, sweetheart, Serafina said, kneeling beside Ophelia's chair. But if you ever change your mind, if you miss this house or want to come back, we can talk about it. This is your decision too. Ophelia considered this with the gravity only children could bring to major life changes. Will Thaddeus still want us if I break something in his fancy house? Serafina's heart squeezed. Thaddeus will want us no matter what, baby. He's not going anywhere. Good, Ophelia said firmly, returning to her wrapping. Because I like him. And Thomas promised to teach me chess, and Evangeline said she'd show me how to braid friendship bracelets, and Dr. Caldwell said there might be baby wolves in the spring. Serafina smiled, thinking about how effortlessly Ophelia had been absorbed into the pack structure. Children, it seemed, adapted to werewolf politics far better than adults. In Ophelia's world, Thaddeus was simply the nice man who made her mama smile. Thomas was the grandfather figure who always had peppermints in his pocket, and the pack members were an extended family who actually seemed to enjoy having a curious 5-year-old around. The doorbell rang, and Serafina opened it to find Thaddeus on her doorstep, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that made him look more like a weekend carpenter than a billionaire werewolf. He'd been helping with the move all week, never pushing, always asking what Serafina needed rather than making assumptions about what she wanted. The moving truck's here, he said, then looked around the nearly empty room. How are you feeling? Terrified, Serafina admitted. And excited. And like I might throw up from nerves. Thaddeus stepped closer, his hands settling on her shoulders with familiar warmth. We can take this as slow as you need, Serafina. There's no pressure to. Thaddeus. Serafina put her fingers against his lips, stopping the careful consideration she'd come to expect from him. I've spent 3 years being careful. Maybe it's time to try being brave instead. Thaddeus kissed her fingertips, his golden eyes holding promises Serafina was finally ready to believe. I love your version of brave. Over the next few hours, Serafina watched her small life expand to fill spaces she'd never imagined occupying. The Blackwood estate had guest wings, libraries, gardens, and enough bedrooms to house Ophelia's entire kindergarten class. But more than the physical space, Serafina found herself surrounded by people who seemed genuinely happy to welcome her and Ophelia into their complicated family structure. Thomas helped Ophelia arrange her stuffed animals in her new bedroom, solemnly discussing the strategic placement of each toy. Evangeline, who turned out to be Margaret's replacement as pack coordinator, showed Serafina the estate's medical clinic, a fully equipped facility where pack members could receive treatment without questions about unusual injuries or rapid healing. Thaddeus built this after he became Alpha, Evangeline explained, showing Serafina the examination rooms and surgical suite. He wanted pack members to have access to medical care without having to explain werewolf physiology to human doctors. Serafina ran her fingers over equipment that was better than what she had access to at the hospital. This is incredible. It's also understaffed, Evangeline said hopefully. We have Dr. Caldwell, but she's primarily a veterinarian. We could really use someone with human medical training. Serafina felt something shift inside her, a sense of purpose that went beyond simply surviving from day to day. I'd like to help. If Thaddeus is okay with it. Serafina, Evangeline said gently, you're going to be Luna. You don't need Thaddeus's permission to make decisions about pack welfare. Luna. The Alpha's mate. Serafina was still adjusting to the idea that her relationship with Thaddeus came with a title and responsibilities she'd never considered. But looking around the medical facility, imagining the lives she could help save, Serafina felt something that had been frozen inside her for 3 years begin to thaw completely. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building something new. That evening, after Ophelia was asleep in her new bedroom and the last of the boxes had been unpacked, Serafina found Thaddeus in his study. He was sitting behind a massive oak desk, reading what looked like legal documents, but he looked up the moment she entered. Ophelia settled in okay? He asked. She's decided that her new room is perfect because she can see the garden from her window and might spot deer in the morning. Serafina moved to the leather chair across from his desk, then changed her mind and walked around to his side instead. Thaddeus pushed his chair back, creating space for Serafina to settle in his lap. She curled against him, breathing in the scent that had become home, pine forests and warmth and safety. What are you reading? She asked. Legal paperwork for Vincent's treatment program. Thaddeus's voice carried a note of sadness. He's entering a residential facility tomorrow. 90 days minimum, possibly longer depending on his progress. Serafina thought about Vincent's breakdown at the estate, the years of pain and inadequacy that had driven him to increasingly desperate choices. How is he? Better. Clearer. The detox was rough, but he's starting to see how Margaret's manipulation contributed to his problems. Thaddeus's arms tightened around Serafina. He asked me to apologize to you again. For Ophelia, for everything. And Margaret? Thaddeus was quiet for a moment. Banished from pack territory. She's moved to her sister's house in California. I've made it clear that she's not welcome back until Vincent is stable and specifically requests her presence. Serafina knew the decision had been difficult for Thaddeus. Banishing family went against every instinct he had. But Margaret's willingness to endanger Ophelia had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Do you think she understands why? Serafina asked. I think Margaret spent so many years justifying Vincent's behavior that she forgot the difference between helping someone and enabling them. Thaddeus's voice was thoughtful rather than angry. Maybe some distance will give her perspective. Serafina shifted in Thaddeus's lap, studying his face. Any regrets? About how everything turned out? Just one. Thaddeus's expression grew serious. I regret that it took a crisis for me to tell you how I feel about you. I should have said it sooner. Serafina felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. What are you saying, exactly? Thaddeus cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones. I'm saying I love you, Serafina Castellanos. I love your strength, your compassion, the way you face down werewolves and family politics with equal courage. I love watching you with Ophelia, seeing how you've built this incredible life from nothing. I love that you chose to trust me even when everything logical told you to run. Serafina felt tears prick her eyes. Thaddeus. I'm not done. Thaddeus's voice was gentle but firm. I know we've only known each other a month. I know this is all happening fast and probably feels overwhelming. But Serafina, I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up every morning knowing you and Ophelia are safe and happy. I want to watch Ophelia grow up, maybe give her brothers and sisters if you want them. I want to be the man you turn to when life gets complicated, and I want you to be the person I come home to when being alpha gets exhausting. Serafina stared at him, her carefully constructed walls finally crumbling completely. You're asking me to marry you. I'm asking you to say yes when I ask you properly. Thaddeus smiled, and Serafina saw joy and nervousness and hope in his expression. With a ring, and Ophelia's permission, and whatever kind of proposal a woman like you deserves. Serafina thought about the life she'd planned, small, safe, predictable. Then she thought about the life Thaddeus was offering, complicated, magical, full of people who wanted to protect her instead of taking from her. Ask me, she whispered. Thaddeus lifted her off his lap, then dropped to one knee beside his desk chair. From his pocket, he produced a ring box that looked like it had been waiting for exactly this moment. Serafina Castellanos, Thaddeus said, his voice steady despite the emotion Serafina could see in his golden eyes. Will you marry me? Will you be my mate, my partner, my Luna? Will you let me love you and Ophelia for the rest of our lives? Serafina looked at the ring, a simple, elegant solitaire that caught the lamplight like captured starlight, then at Thaddeus's face. She thought about Ophelia sleeping peacefully upstairs, surrounded by people who would protect her. She thought about the medical clinic where she could save lives, about Thomas's gentle grandfather energy and Evangeline's friendship, about the pack members who'd welcomed her with open arms. She thought about love that didn't ask her to be smaller, safer, less than she was capable of being. Yes, Serafina said, and felt her world expand to encompass possibilities she'd never dared imagine. Yes to all of it. Thaddeus slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and kissed her with all the desperate relief of a man who'd been holding his breath for weeks. Serafina kissed him back, tasting hope and future and the promise of mornings that didn't begin with fear. When they finally broke apart, Serafina pressed her forehead against Thaddeus's, both of them breathing hard. So, Thaddeus said quietly, ready for the rest of our lives? Serafina looked at her ring, then at the man who'd somehow become essential to her happiness in the span of 4 weeks. With you, she said. I'm ready for anything. Epilogue, 1 year later. Serafina stood in front of the full-length mirror in the estate's master bedroom, adjusting the simple white dress she'd chosen for her wedding day. It wasn't the elaborate gown most women probably imagined for their wedding, just a knee-length sheath that flattered her newly rounded belly and allowed her to move comfortably. At 6 months pregnant with twins, Serafina had discovered that werewolf pregnancies came with their own unique challenges. Heightened senses that made her morning sickness legendary, protective instincts from pack members that bordered on suffocating, and Thaddeus's barely controlled anxiety every time she climbed stairs. But also, the overwhelming joy of watching Ophelia prepare to become a big sister, the wonder of pack members who treated her pregnancy like a gift to the entire community, and Thaddeus's hands on her belly every night, marveling at the life they'd created together. Mama, you look beautiful. Ophelia bounced into the room, resplendent in her flower girl dress, pale pink with enough tulle to satisfy any 5-year-old's princess fantasies. Thomas says it's almost time, and Vincent wants to know if Uncle Thaddeus is going to throw up from nerves. Serafina smiled, thinking about how seamlessly Ophelia had adapted to calling the pack members her extended family. Thomas was Grandpa Thomas, Evangeline was Aunt Evangeline, and Vincent, sober for 8 months now and serving as Thaddeus's best man, had become Uncle Vincent, the family member with the best bedtime stories and an inexhaustible supply of knock-knock jokes. "Is Uncle Vincent nervous too?" Serafina asked, smoothing Ophelia's hair. "A little. But Dr. Caldwell said she'll hold his hand during the ceremony if he gets scared." Ophelia's expression grew thoughtful. "Mama, do you think Vincent and Dr. Caldwell will get married too?" Serafina thought about the gentle romance that had bloomed between Vincent and the pack's physician during his recovery. Dr. Caldwell, Rebecca, had been instrumental in Vincent's healing, providing both medical support and the kind of patient understanding he'd needed to rebuild his life. "Maybe, sweetheart. When they're ready." "Good. Vincent smiles more now, and Dr. Caldwell makes really good cookies." Ophelia paused, then looked up at Serafina with the serious expression she wore for important announcements. "Mama, I'm glad we moved here. I like having so many people who love us." Serafina knelt carefully, gathering Ophelia into a hug that accommodated her growing belly. "Me too, baby girl. Me too." A soft knock interrupted the moment, and Margaret appeared in the doorway. Serafina tensed automatically, old habits died hard, but Margaret's presence today came with Thaddeus's explicit invitation and Vincent's enthusiastic support. "Serafina, dear," Margaret said quietly. "You look lovely. May I speak with you for a moment?" Serafina studied Margaret's face, noting the changes 8 months of therapy and genuine remorse had wrought. The older woman looked smaller somehow, less formidable, but also more genuine than Serafina had ever seen her. "Of course." Ophelia skipped away to find Thomas, leaving Serafina and Margaret alone. Margaret approached slowly, her movements careful and unthreatening. "I wanted to apologize," Margaret said simply. "Not just for what I did to you and Ophelia, but for all of it. For enabling Vincent's problems, for manipulating pack politics, for letting my own ambitions cloud my judgment about what was truly best for my family." Serafina watched Margaret's face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. She found only genuine regret and the kind of exhaustion that came from facing uncomfortable truths about yourself. "How is therapy going?" Serafina asked. "Illuminating," Margaret said with a rueful smile. "Apparently, I've been what Dr. Morrison calls a controlling narcissist for most of Vincent's life. Not exactly the legacy I wanted to leave." Serafina felt some of her lingering anger soften. "What matters is that you're working to change." "Yes, well, it's rather difficult to argue with your own son when he tells you that your help nearly destroyed his life." Margaret's voice carried genuine pain. "Vincent's doing wonderfully, by the way. He speaks of you and Thaddeus with such gratitude. Says you both saved his life." Serafina thought about Vincent's transformation over the past year, from the desperate, addicted man who'd kidnapped Ophelia to the thoughtful, sober person who'd become one of Thaddeus's most trusted advisors. Recovery was a daily choice, but Vincent seemed committed to making it every day. "We all saved each other," Serafina said simply. Margaret nodded, then reached into her purse and withdrew a small wrapped box. "I have something for you. A wedding gift, though I understand if you prefer not to accept it." Serafina hesitated, then took the box. Inside was an antique locket, delicate silver work that spoke of family heirlooms and generations of Blackwood women. "It was Augustus's mother's," Margaret explained. "She wore it at her wedding, as did I, and I'd hoped." Margaret's voice trailed off. "Well, I'd hoped to give it to Vincent's mate someday. But Rebecca has her own family jewelry, and this piece belongs with the Alpha's Luna." Serafina opened the locket, finding spaces for 2 small photographs. "Margaret, this is beautiful, but..." "Please," Margaret said quietly. "Let me give you something that comes from love instead of manipulation. Let me contribute to your happiness instead of trying to control it." Serafina looked at Margaret's face and saw a woman who was genuinely trying to make amends for choices that had nearly destroyed her family. "Thank you. I'll treasure it." Margaret smiled, the first completely genuine expression Serafina had ever seen from her. You're good for Thaddeus, Serafina. Better than I ever imagined. He's happier than I've seen him since he was a child. Before Serafina could respond, Evangeline appeared in the doorway, radiant in her maid of honor dress. It's time, Evangeline announced. Thaddeus is pacing so hard he's wearing a groove in the terrace stones, and Vincent says if we don't start soon, he's going to drug the groom to calm his nerves. Serafina laughed, her hand automatically moving to her belly where the twins were performing what felt like an elaborate dance routine. Well, we can't have that. The wedding ceremony was everything Serafina hadn't known she wanted, intimate despite the 60 pack members in attendance, personal despite the formal werewolf traditions they'd incorporated, and joyful in a way that felt like coming home. Thaddeus waited for her at the end of an aisle lined with late autumn flowers, his expression shifting from nervous anticipation to wonder as she approached. He looked handsome in his dark suit, but more than that, he looked happy in a way that made Serafina's heart race. Ophelia preceded Serafina down the aisle, scattering rose petals with the serious concentration of someone performing a very important job. The pack members stood as Serafina passed, their faces reflecting genuine affection and acceptance that still sometimes surprised her. Vincent stood beside Thaddeus as promised, his face clear and peaceful in a way that spoke of hard-won sobriety and genuine healing. Rebecca sat in the front row, beaming at Vincent with obvious pride and affection. Thomas officiated, his deep voice carrying the weight of traditions that stretched back centuries, but the words he spoke were about love, partnership, and chosen family rather than dominance and territory. When Thaddeus took Serafina's hands, his fingers were steady despite the emotion she could see in his golden eyes. Serafina, he said during their personal vows, you saved my life in more ways than one. You showed me that strength doesn't require isolation, that leadership can include compassion, that love is worth any risk. I promise to protect you and Ophelia and our children, to cherish the family we're building, and to love you through whatever challenges life brings us. Serafina's voice was steady as she replied, Thaddeus, you showed me that it's possible to build something beautiful from broken pieces. You gave me and Ophelia a family, a home, a future I never dared imagine. I promise to stand beside you, to trust in our love, and to never stop choosing us, every single day. When Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, the pack's celebration rivaled any human wedding Serafina had ever attended. There was dancing under string lights, toasts that ranged from heartfelt to hilarious, and enough food to feed twice their number. But the moment Serafina treasured most came later, when the celebration had wound down and she and Thaddeus stood on the terrace, watching Ophelia chase fireflies with some of the other pack children. Any regrets? Thaddeus asked, his arms around Serafina from behind, his hands resting on her belly. Just one, Serafina said, leaning back against his chest. Thaddeus tensed slightly. What's that? I regret that it took a car crash and a kidnapping to bring us together. Serafina turned in his arms, smiling at his expression of relief. Though I suppose some love stories are worth the dramatic entrance. Thaddeus kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. Speaking of dramatic entrances, how are our twins doing? Serafina felt one of the babies kick enthusiastically against Thaddeus's palm. Active. I think they're excited about the party. They're going to be born into the most loving, protective pack in the world, Thaddeus said softly. Ophelia's going to be an amazing big sister, Thomas is already planning fishing trips, and Vincent's been researching the best bedtime stories for multiple children. Serafina looked around at their chosen family, pack members cleaning up from the celebration, Ophelia being carried inside by Evangeline, Vincent and Rebecca sharing a quiet conversation under the garden lights. I never imagined this, Serafina admitted. A year ago, I thought my life was about surviving, getting by, protecting Ophelia and making it through each day. I never thought about thriving. And now? Serafina smiled, feeling the babies move under Thaddeus's hands, surrounded by people who'd become family in the truest sense of the word. Now I think we're just getting started. Thaddeus kissed her then, surrounded by fireflies and the sound of pack members saying goodnight, and Serafina tasted their future, complicated and magical and full of love she'd finally learned to trust. Some fairy tales, she reflected, were worth waiting for. Even if they came with werewolves. Thank you for listening to this wonderful story. Like, share and subscribe for more.